He is alone with the projector. Not the director, though he could be. Not the censor, though the scissors glint in the corner. He is the audience member, the kid who snuck into the matinee, the priest who comes in plain clothes, the young woman deciding she is tired of being told what's proper and what isn't. All of them sit together in the dark, and the projector begins to hum. The 1960s do not politely enter, they kick the door and stand in the foyer dripping rain on the morals of the house. A decade that smells of hairspray and tear gas, papal condemnations and pop singles. The production code, which once told filmmakers where bodies could touch and which words could never be said, is sagging like an old velvet curtain. Critics will rage, politicians will flinch, courts will convene, but the film keeps rolling. You want to know what the 60s really felt like? Don't ask the slogans. Watch the movies that made the Guardians panic, the films that were banned, booed, condemned, or whispered about. Watch the images that slipped past the ushers and colonized imaginations. That's the story. That's our map. Tonight, the theater is our confessional, our battlefield, our rumor mill. We begin where the decade begins, 1960, when a camera turned toward the watcher, a knife descended through a shower's hiss, and Rome through a party the church tried to shut down. Peeping Tom, 1960. It opens with an eye, your eye, stolen by a camera that wants what you want and then punishes you for it. Michael Powell stages the crime in plain view. The killer films his victims as they die, trapping terror on celluloid. But the true offense, the one that scorched polite London critics, is moral blackmail. Peeping Tom accuses the audience of complicity, of wanting to look, of craving the illicit thrill of seeing the forbidden, then pretending to be shocked at the price. This is the quiet heresy the decade will amplify, that voyeurism is the house religion of cinema. It is not new, Powell says, but now he holds the mirror closer. The scandal lands like a brick. Reviews arrive with the prosecutor's fury. The film is vilified. Powell, once celebrated, walks out of the 60s carrying scars. The public doesn't just reject his monster, it rejects the possibility that the monster is sitting with them, eating Jaffas in the dark. And yet in that rejection, a seed is planted. If the image can indict us, it can also change us. Peeping Tom becomes the first crack, the hairline fracture that spreads across the decade's glossy surface. We cut to a humble editing room. Light leaks under the door, and a projector chatters. The killer splices together fear like any editor cuts a montage. That's the horror. Looking is not passive anymore. It makes you responsible. It makes you dangerous. And the 60s, it turns out, are going to ask whether America, Britain, any of us, can be trusted with the images we crave. Psycho, 1960. Then a shower sings. A knife stutters the air. The curtain rings scream on their rod. Alfred Hitchcock breaks the American heartbeat into 24 frames per second and reassembles it wrong, so it beats in new places. He performs a magician's trick with the heroine, then deletes her from the story like a cruel god. In the lobby, a sign tells latecomers they will not be admitted after the film begins, as if the theater has become a sealed ritual. You must see it from the start, the master insists, and you must keep it secret. That command is more than marketing. It is a declaration that movies are events now, not mere engagements. Psycho is many small blasphemies, sexual panic with a laugh that curdles, a bathroom scene with an honesty the code had always tried to blur, a boy's desire wearing his mother's face. But here is the real trespass. Hitchcock discovers the audience's pulse and wires it into the projector. He times fear not to morality, but to rhythm. He doesn't tell us what's right. He compels us to feel what's next. In the projection booth of 1960, Psycho is the metronome. Editors will learn to cut on screams. Composers will learn when to be silent, and America, dazed and thrilled, will wander out of the movie house a little less sure that stories have to play fair, or that punishment belongs to the wicked. Viridiana, 1961. A young novice steps into a world that says it wants her purity and then dares her to keep it. Luis Buñuel frames the story like a parable written with a razor. Viridiana, on the brink of taking her vows, visits the uncle who funded her convent schooling. Charity curdles. A grotesque courtship follows. The film whispers that the line between piety and perversion is as thin as a veil and just as easy to lift. The uproar is immediate and furious. A Dinner for Beggars turns into a parody of The Last Supper, an image so volatile the church and state respond as if the frame itself is a bomb. What shocks is not only the blasphemy alleged, but the film's diagnosis, that philanthropy can be a performance and innocence a kind of dangerous vanity. Buñuel doesn't stab at faith, he cuts at hypocrisy, and the blood looks the same. The authorities reach for bans and condemnations, but scandals have strange afterlives. Letters circulate, prints travel. Critics whisper that this blasphemer understands the anatomy of grace better than his accusers. In the gloom of the 1960s, Viridiana becomes a candle that gutters and returns. A film forcibly hidden and yet forever seen, the sort of controversy that proves what it tried to stop. Because once an image suggests that holiness might also be hunger, you can't unknow it. The decade files that sensation under. Reasons the old guardians will lose their grip. Victim, 1961. His face is handsome, guarded, and tired of pretending. Dirk Bogarde, matinee idol with an educated drawl, plays a barrister who risks everything to expose a ring of blackmailers targeting gay men. The film's title cuts both ways: the queer victims of extortion and the society that demands silence as the price of safety. Victim does not come wrapped in euphemism. It names desire plainly and treats its characters with grave respect. So rare, so quietly radical, that rumor insists Bogarde smuggled his own truth into the performance. Censors twitch. The word homosexual feels like contraband on a British screen. Audiences lean forward as if a confession has been made just by speaking. The scandal is not prurience. It is empathy. Victim asks a straight public to imagine the daily geometry of fear, the coded phone calls, the half-life of love under a law that makes intimacy a crime. And suddenly, the courtroom is not just a set, it is a pressure point in the culture. The outrage that follows doesn't look like booze and bands alone. It looks like conversations happening after the show in cars and kitchens about what rules are worth keeping if they require cruelty to enforce. By the time the credits roll, controversy has done something useful. It has turned a movie into a mirror. And in that mirror, a country sees the outlines of change long before Parliament writes it into law. Lolita, 1962. How did they ever make a film of Lolita? Read the posters. A question posed like a dare and answered with a smirk. Stanley Kubrick approaches Nabokov's notorious novel with a conjurer's cunning, moving the camera just so, letting suggestion do what depiction could not under the code's fraying leash. James Mason's voice drips civilized poison. Peter Sellers turns mischief into menace. Sue Lyon, in heart-shaped sunglasses, becomes an emblem the decade can't look away from and can't honestly face. The controversy lives in the gap between what the film can say and what the audience already knows. Kubrick ages the girl, rearranges scenes, spins comedy around the taboo like cotton candy around a stick, and still, the core remains radioactive. The Guardians count violations. Viewers count silences. In those silences, the 1960s hear a new kind of moral vertigo. That a film can both charm and indict, that you can laugh and then feel the laugh sour on your tongue. Theaters juggle cuts. Critics argue over taste versus truth. Parents fume while teenagers make the sunglasses a fashion. A lesson hardens. Censorship can redirect desire, but it cannot erase it. Lolita becomes the controversy that teaches filmmakers how to dance with the code, stepping close enough to feel its breath and then slipping past. Exterminating Angel, 1962. Guests arrive at a mansion after the opera. They eat, they drink, they gossip, and when the hour grows late, they discover they cannot leave the drawing room. No magic words are spoken, no visible barrier descends. They simply cannot cross the threshold. Days pass, manners rot. Those with faith pray, those with money scheme. Those with strength become wardens. Buñuel turns a social gathering into a terrarium, watching the elegant suffocate under their own rituals. What offends here is not gore or skin, but implication, that the scaffolding of class and ceremony is a trap we choose together. The film's surreal logic feels like blasphemy by other means. A mock mass without a priest, a miracle without God, a confession delivered to no one. Rumors of bans and official disapproval only sharpen the bite. Each time a censor protests, the image grows more legible. The Room stands for a country that cannot admit it's trapped, for a tradition that has outlived its tenderness, for a century that keeps repeating the night before disaster because the champagne is already open. The guests will escape only when they reproduce the exact conditions of their first entrapment, a ritual of repetition that feels like indictment. The 1960s, in turn, begin to recognize their own loops: scandal, suppression, amplification, change. If the drawing room is a metaphor, then so is the decade, a place we pretend is comfortable until somebody tries the door and realizes it's locked from the inside. The Pawnbroker, 1964. In a gray shop behind a barred window, a man prices the wreckage of other people's lives. Sol Nazerman's eyes are winter. His voice arrives as if it has traveled a long way through smoke to reach us. Sidney Lumet doesn't ask for pity. He stages memory like an ambush. One glance at a woman's arm, one child's toy, one overheard phrase, then a flash. Fences, dogs, a hand pressed against a glass that will not open. The camera cuts between the present and a past that refuses to stay buried, and the edits feel like electrical shocks. The scandal, people say, is the nudity, a woman's breast, seen not with lust but with horror, as the image collapses time and Sewell remembers the camp. Censors hover with rulers and rules, counting seconds and framing, deciding whether trauma can be shown if it arrives inside a memory, whether the human body is obscene when it is only a witness to suffering. Somewhere in a screening room, men in suits argue over a frame that hurts for the right reasons. The production code blinks, and, for once, lets an exception slip through. But the real rupture is not a measurement on a stopwatch. It is the film's ethics. The Pawnbroker insists that pain cannot be domesticated into tasteful ellipses. The nakedness that mattered here was never skin. It was the baring of a survivor's interior, ugly with guilt, armored with bitterness, still capable of mercy he does not trust. If the code's job was to keep audiences safe from improper images, Lumet demonstrates that safety is sometimes the lie. The gatekeepers wanted to believe decency lived in what you did not show. The movie replies that decency lives in how you dare to show it. In that shop, prices are transactions, but value is something the decade is relearning. The image, just a few seconds long, becomes a wedge in the edifice. You can hear the crack begin. If art can be honest about a wound, the old rules will have to choose: protect sensibilities or protect truth. In 1964, truth gets a small seismic victory. Blow Up, 1966. Swinging London hums like a neon beehive. A fashion photographer moves through the city as if he owns it. Models stretch like cats in sunlight. Music throbs in basement clubs. The camera turns appetite into currency. Then, in a quiet park, he snaps what he thinks is flirtation, enlarges the images, enlarges again, until the pixels of the era's innocence come apart. Maybe it is a murder. Maybe it is mood. Michelangelo Antonioni films ambiguity like it's a crime scene and leaves us to catalog the evidence. Here is the controversy that feels like a style guide for the future. Nudity not as scandal, but as weather. Moral certainty treated as the least interesting option in the room. The American censors refuse their seal. The studio, sensing the wind has changed, releases the picture anyway with a mature audience's label. The film becomes a hit. Suddenly, the code looks like a rule book for a sport no one is playing. The line in the sand turns out to be chalk on a rainy day. Blow Up is not obscene because it shows skin. It is obscene to its critics because it refuses to decode itself for the viewer. That refusal is its seduction. The final mime tennis match is a love letter to the audience's complicity. You can hear the ball if you believe in the game. Cinema is the court, perception, the racket. Censors cannot legislate that sound. The Battle of Algiers, 1966. A bomb in a cafe, a checkpoint, a basement where a man's face learns the alphabet of pain. Gillo Pontecorvo's chronicle of urban guerrilla war looks so much like documentary that many swear it must be compiled from newsreels. It is not. It is choreography written in the language of memory, with non-professional actors and a camera that refuses to blink. Controversy arrives from every direction. In some countries, screenings are postponed or curtailed. In others, the film becomes an unofficial manual for those who would fight or those who would suppress the fighting. The offense is distributional. Each side recognizes itself, and neither enjoys the mirror. The movie declines to hand out halos. It sticks to cause and effect, blood and reprisal, the iron law of occupation and revolt. That neutrality feels to some like treason, to others like the first honest thing they have seen about modern war. An odd afterlife begins, captions added to warn viewers that the film does not endorse what it records, special showings for officials who need to understand the street's logic. If cinema had been a dream machine, Algiers proves it can also be a drill. It bores into the concrete of the present tense until sparks fly. Ulysses, 1967. A day in Dublin unfolds like a cathedral made of language. Joseph Strick doesn't try to pin Joyce to a bulletin board. He chases him through streets, pub smoke, bedrooms, and the drift of thought itself. Censors, already familiar with the book's profile in their files, approach the film like a returning offender. Passages of inner speech, frank references to the body, a final monologue that moans yes and yes and yes. None of it sits politely on a moral ledger. Bans flicker on and off across countries and cities, like power grids in a storm. Cuts are demanded. Alternative versions sprout. Festivals fight to show it. The controversy is strangely literary. 100 arguments about fidelity, what must be kept, what can be altered, become, in the hands of censors, arguments about which kinds of honesty a culture can tolerate out loud. Ulysses insists that interiority is not obscene, that to film thoughts is to film flesh, that language can be erotic without being pornographic. Audiences who enter wary of homework emerge surprised to feel heat. They have watched a movie that treats consciousness as a body, and in doing so it exposes a censor's blind spot. You can police images, but can you police syntax? The decade will keep asking that question as filmmakers learn that one way around a wall is to speak through the mind instead of the mouth. Bonnie and Clyde, 1967. A woman in a cloche hat and a man with a grin like a dare rob a rural bank, and suddenly crime looks like youth, stylish, breathless, giddy with risk. Arthur Penn stages the Depression as a fashion shoot until the bullets arrive, and then he refuses to blink. The violence is slow and fast at once, cut with a rhythm that feels musical and obscene. Critics split like a log. Some declare it irresponsible, juvenile. Others hear the future in its crackle and call it a masterpiece. Pauline Kael writes a defense that reads like a rescue. Bosley Crowther digs in and loses the room. The controversy isn't only the blood, though the finale, a ballet of dust and lead, tattooed itself on America's retinas. It's the tone. The movie invites you to fall in love with two crooks and then punishes you for believing that love can outswim consequence. The 1930s are replayed for the 1960s, a generation that distrusts the law, flirts with outlaws. The establishment rends its garments. The box office decides. Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway become faces of the friction, beautiful sinners who make the sermon look tired. In the wake, studios learn a ruthless lesson. Controversy can be an asset if the film has a pulse. The MPAA's old enforcement regime looks suddenly quaint, like a posted speed limit on an open highway. If Bonnie and Clyde is irresponsible, then so is the world that made its romance plausible. The ending's 1,000 cuts aren't only on the screen, they are on the membrane between art and audience, where sensation becomes reflection. People argued as they left the theater, their voices pitched higher than usual, as if the movie had retuned the air. The Killing of Sister George, 1968. London, with a keyhole cut into it. A television actress famous for playing a cuddly nurse discovers that fame cannot warm a cold apartment. What can? A lover's body, a drink that burns, a humiliation rehearsed until it feels like a song. Robert Aldrich points his camera into spaces British and American pictures had tiptoed around, and leaves the door open. A lesbian relationship staged not as a joke, not as a pathology to be wagged at from a distance, but as a messy, desirous, often cruel intimacy between women who know how to wound each other by name. The uproar organizes itself quickly. Scenes shot in a real London lesbian club, the Gateways, give the picture a documentary hum that alarms the Guardians. Critics argue whether the story is exploitation or exposure. Censors reach for scissors and labels. In the United States, the brand new ratings board stamps it with an X. The letter will later harden into a synonym for pornography. Here, at the system's birth, it still floats as a sign saying, "Adults only. Enter at your own risk." Audiences do. The film's sin, to its detractors, is not simply sex. It is the insistence that desire between women exists beyond moral diagrams, that it can be tender one minute and vicious the next, that it can bloom in the shadow of a television studio that wants its star to remain a cuddly fiction. If earlier decades banished queerness to subtext, Sister George makes text of texture, the choreography of jealousy, the power imbalance of age and fame, the ache of being seen and judged by a world that is only just learning new words. The controversy leaves a residue that will cling for years. Queer visibility arrives on a screen policed by straight judgments, and the result is both breakthrough and bruise. Night of the Living Dead, 1968. A graveyard. A brother's teasing. Something wrong in the way the man walks toward the camera. George A. Romero spends almost nothing and buys immortality. The dead get up, slow and starving, and the living do what the living do under pressure. Panic, bicker, hide, harden. Black and white film stock turns daylight into autopsy light and night into a chalk outline. The news breaks into the narrative the way it does in real life, rudely, with anchors trying to sound calm while the set lights make everyone sweat. Before the rating system fully arrives, this film slides into Saturday matinees. Children sit with popcorn and learn that adults cannot protect them. Not from what's outside, not from what's inside the house. The violence is not balletic, it is hungry. Flesh, tears without music. A little girl eats her family. A hero, black, competent, the only adult in the room, meets an ending so bleak it feels like the decade's mirror shattering in your lap. Audience members stumble into the sun, blinking, as if the theater has been a cave where something feral learned to speak. The controversy doesn't wear a trench coat and wag a finger. It staggers and moans and pushes against the door you're trying to hold. Some call it indecent. Others call it necessary. Romero's trick is not gore, it is democracy. Anyone can become the monster, and more frightening, anyone can become the mob. The last images, grainy, procedural, indifferent, look like photographs you were not meant to see. The film becomes an argument for ratings by accident, a proof that content can wound without context. And yet the wound is instructive. The 60s, already acquainted with assassination footage and nightly war reports, recognizes the rhythm. Horror has learned to speak the grammar of the news. The year closes with a new alphabet on the marquee, G, M, R, X, letters that promise guidance and deliver instead a new kind of permission. The audience has seen what images can do when left alone in a room with their appetites. The next year will test how far that permission stretches. Midnight Cowboy, 1969. A Texas kid with a suitcase walks into Times Square, believing the hat on his head is a passport. He is handsome enough to be mistaken for confidence, naive enough to be mistaken for cruelty, lonely enough to be sold anything. Joe Buck wants to be a hustler for women. New York wants him for everything else. Ratso Rizzo limps into his life like a stray with genius survival instincts and a cough that sounds like a clock striking midnight. John Schlesinger's camera refuses to perfume anything. Peephole theaters and fluorescent rooms, a party where the high and the broke tangle, a city that eats the weak and burps. None of it looks like the America in travel brochures. The X rating arrives stamped on the poster like a warning and a dare. It suggests that adulthood might finally be allowed to examine itself without a chaperone. The headlines wag. The moralists warm up, and then, astonishingly, the film wins the industry's grand prize. Respectability wraps its arms around a story about hustling, friendship, exploitation, and the stubborn hope that two broken people can make a raft out of each other. What made Midnight Cowboy scandalous wasn't only the sex traded in shadows or the flashes of queer life that had previously been left to suggestion, it was the ending's refusal to hand out redemption coupons. The American dream rides a bus south with sweat on its brow and a feverish prayer for sunshine. The boy in the cowboy boots learns that the city's worst cruelty is indifference. The controversy, in hindsight, looks like initiation. The mainstream learned how to hold grief without covering it with a blanket of moral messaging. Audiences did not abandon the film for being frank. They found themselves in its frankness. The Damned, 1969. A wealthy German family pours champagne while the Sentry prepares to burn down their house. Luchino Visconti watches the Essenbecks as if they were an opera staged inside a safe. Steel magnates, schemers, sons too clever to be kind, daughters raised like glassware, an SS man with hands as clean as bone. And when the last squib's empty in that dusty Mexican courtyard, and the suited men of Midtown whisper about ratings and liability, the decade exhales. Midnight Cowboy walks off with the Oscar, X be damned. The Wild Bunch leaves smoke hanging in the rafters. Visconti's The Damned stares into the mirror and refuses to blink. The 60s don't end with a period so much as an afterimage, bright enough to haunt. Afterimage, what the 60s left burning. The curtain falls on the 60s, but the dust never truly settles. What was once scandal is now syllabus. The frames that censors tried to burn now glow in museum dark rooms, projected for audiences who lean forward, hungry for the very shock their parents feared. Each reel was a battle, fought not just on screens but in courtrooms, in church bulletins, in the ink of outraged newspaper columns. Filmmakers walked into that fire knowing they might not walk out with careers intact, and yet they lit the match anyway. From the voyeur's lens in Peeping Tom to the slow-motion carnage of the Wild Bunch, the decade taught cinema that rules were temporary, but images, once seen, could not be unseen. It was never just about the movies. It was about a generation learning how to look without asking permission. And somewhere, in the flicker between frames, the 60s handed the next era a new truth. The most dangerous stories are the ones worth telling. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment down below as it helps support this channel. Also, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our newest videos. Thanks for watching.